You guys know me. I got to start inside of a city. So we start right here, start looking around, start identifying exactly how the developers for Horizon made their world. A big step up in the extras that you see within a city. Now, one of the things that we originally uncovered with Horizon Zero Dawn was that they made their tribes geographically first, meaning that they decided that the tribes were in certain particular areas and they allowed those areas to outfit the tribes. They basically allowed for it to inform the decisions on how each tribe would work, what they would have to work with, how they would trade, how would they create, would they have specialists or not within their very bones of the tribe structure. I love this first place because, as you see in Forbidden West, even more so than Horizon Zero Dawn, is just extra places where characters can move around and develop. They do have a general crowd AI system in Forbidden West that they didn't have in Horizon Zero Dawn, and you certainly see it. But looking around at this particular area, you start to really identify with how they build this town. I love this right here. They've got that stone in the bucket so that the bucket lowers easier into the water because, of course, it displaces it. And if you've ever used a well and you don't plan around that, you can always have issues getting the bucket to actually sink into the water. But even when you look at this fire here and you start to see the detail within it, it's not just that the details are there. It's the details within the details. It's how detailed they are. It's not just a piece of wood in the fire. It's multiple pieces all charred differently and then that fire burning up. Now, coming in here into the tavern, I love this. Looking at the way people used to smoke different animal meats, the way people used to cook, you see these hanging above on that large steel lattice. This is just awesome. Ignore that little graphical bug up there in the corner. This is 1.3, but there are still some bugs in this game. Most likely you'll see some as we go forward. This is a great place to highlight the audio as well. You see all kinds of audio here, as well as that crowd system sort of playing out with characters moving around. You see this guy here feeding pig slop to the pigs. All of the characters in the game and this crowd system really does add a feeling of life to the game. One of the things that we see in a lot of different titles, whether they have a great deal of tangential data, a great deal of awesome geometry, a lot of times the places don't feel alive. And what they've done with this game is made sure that it does. Even the people interacting with the seats, you'll see characters grabbing things and actually hitching them up over their waists or kicking their foot out to actually lift them up. It is very cool. Or stumbling right there. Oh, and there we go. Kicking that up. I don't even know if they're kicking it up or if they're like kicking out at something in anger, but it's this extra bit of animation that you see. Throughout the entire game, you'll see these kind of things. You'll also notice that almost nothing is static or uniform in the way Guerrilla has built this. Everything from the places and the planks in which they're connected, how they're connected, whether that's bits of steel or rope. You also see moving mechanisms all the places here. I'm going to show you a bunch of them, but you see these kegs being moved of alcohol. They'll lower this one down. You'll see others be rolled out. There's a sense of detail here. The charcoal near the fires, they'll actually shovel it in. There's all these extra steps. And to a lot of people, these may be data points that they may not notice, they may not pick up on them. But what it actually does for the game, and what it does for a gamer who does notice them, is it lodges them more in the immersion of the title. It makes it feel more realistic. So those crowd systems, as well as all these small details, do help a great deal, especially if you're going to really invest time in this game. This right here is very cool. Just a little bit of detail here where somebody has actually created sort of a warthog toy for a child on rollers. I love that. These extra little bits that you'll find. And no matter where you go in the game, there's even some parts of the game where you probably shouldn't go, that if you do some jumping or you try to wiggle your way in, you can get there and you'll see fully detailed and realized locations behind them. And you'll even see characters that really, other than just through a storefront, you probably wouldn't even be able to notice. So as we go up here, we're going to see the various different ways in which the tribes are separated in Forbidden West. One of the major things that they wanted to do was make sure that everybody understood that these multiple tribes, including the new ones that you meet, all had a different feel. And this tribe definitely is built around a bit more commerce, but certainly agriculture, certainly alcohols, and a great deal of stonework. We'll see a quarry I'll try to walk you guys to, and you can look at the different bits that they've done and see those all over the tribe's locations. So you may end up in the brewery here, but you'll find parts and you'll notice various different elements that actually exist in other locations in the game, as if those parts are moving between the different tribal locations. And this will then change as you go into other tribes' locations in Forbidden West in particular. It's definitely stepped up here. I like this location here. You got the pressure valves. You've got this hammered steel. You can definitely look. That is a completely different type. Actually, it's iron, but it's a completely different type of metal there, hammered down. Nowhere near as smooth as everything else. Some of the roofs seem to have the same thing, but I like that look. Everything looks just a little bit off kilter and certainly more natural. And there we go with our first crash. Got it back up and running. Tapestries here. One of the things to actually understand, especially about the different tribes within the game, the different ways in which they all work, it's quite interesting to note just how difficult various different dyes were for actually creating, especially back in the day, or especially if you don't have a lot of manufacturing. One of the things about dyes is that many dyes actually won't stick to a material or damage the material. So you have like additive dyes where they need something else, which is called a mordant, and that's chemicals that help bind onto the fabric. And usually it's another kind of acid from normal dyes, which they don't actually need anything added to them, and they can actually bind to a material all by itself. Tyrian purple, for example, that was, I think it was 1500 BC when tribes found out that they could get a purple dye from mollusks, and it was insanely expensive to get and make. And that's one of the reasons why purple is actually known for royalty and being expensive, because to get it originally, it actually was. In fact, later on, they actually had a purple dye. They found it was easier to create, and it was literally termed the poor person's purple. It was a slightly different shade, wasn't made from mollusks, and was cheaper. I want to walk you guys down to the sawmill. So the first thing you're going to start noticing is these rocks. They're actually put on barges. Those barges move around. But I want to walk you through the sawmill, because this is actually one of the first places that really stunned me with the amount of detail that they had put in here. Ignoring the sawdust, ignoring the people that actually move the various different parts, this is very accurate to what you would actually probably use. Now, there's a couple different bits for fantasy here, but I love the fact that the people are pushing these rocks down, or these logs down. The logs go up the slide. The slide actually has the right rails and a gap for the saw. These are kind of things that you see in a lot of games where they just don't have the time to get into that kind of detail. This is an up and down saw, not a circular saw, because a circular saw, of course, is much harder to actually create and maintain than just an up and down saw that they have. And it saws it and puts it out into a place below that this other guy who's turning this pulley actually moves it. What's cool about this, they actually call a stop to the work sometimes and will actually repair something and then have it start back up again. Yeah, it's 11th century tech, basically. That's when they were first sort of used by people, but it still works. I love that they actually call quits to the job, too, for just a moment. And then you go out here and you actually see these guys using the grabber poles, moving those logs around, making sure that they're out of the current, and then moving them down. Now, some of the places you won't actually see that log actually move. You'll just see them sort of poking at it, but it is just one more step of animation and various different things that are actually occurring. Oh, here we go. They've started back up, and you can see those boards sliding from the other guy moving the other pulley. It's just a step beyond what you see in so many other games. And as we walk through this, I'm going to show you that's continued pretty much through all of Horizon Forbidden West. Horizon Zero Dawn stunned me in its detail, but this game is shocking. We're talking very close to Red Dead. We're talking very close to GTA 5. The amount of detail here is phenomenal. I also love this. You'll find different bridges in different locations in this game run by different tribes in different ways. They've taken the stones out of the quarry, connected them. You can see stones like this in the quarry. They've connected them and put them here as basically a way to shut that bridge up if they need to at any time. It's very cool. Extra little water wheel here. Don't know why they left a water wheel out in the grass, but maybe it was damaged prior. I just love the draw distance. Look at that. The amount of detail that you can see from far away in this game is phenomenal. To carry on a little bit about the discussion about the land as well as the locations, you're also going to see this crossroads. I'll show you this sign here. Of course, Aloy herself actually has the ability to use her focus, but I did like these up here. I can't really understand the pictographs that are on there. I don't know if those are actually right or wrong. When you look at the way that especially different tribes in this game were built, one of the things that the developers had talked about when creating the original game was looking at clothing, looking at what materials various different villages could make. And one of the things they came upon was coiled rope or coils and wrapped objects, and that would actually be something that a lot of the different groups could actually use with the items that were nearby. And so that's one of the reasons why you see a lot of rope holding together larger and larger entities in various different places. So you'll see a wall held up by that, as well as metal rivets. But those metal rivets sometimes, or those metal brackets, a lot of times actually aren't constructed very well. And you just see a lot of rope being used. And they decided as they looked and they studied that this would be something that they would probably be able to do at this time. They've also broken the current there so that they can repair that raft as they're doing work on it. And you'll see those kind of rafts downstream. I'll walk downstream and I'll show you this one place. It's very cool to see all of these little details in a game world, especially because this is one tribe of many in the game, and their locations look completely different than everybody else's. Indeed, the actual job systems for different tribes are different. Now, with the free climbing, I wanted to talk about this. They basically added in a far more robust free climbing that's in this game versus the more Mario-style exact platforming that we saw in the original. So you have the very typical kind of stodgy jumping, especially that's what you see in the cauldrons, which are the underground tombs in this game, the places where you can learn how to hack different creatures, but then you also see the free climbing there. Very good draw distance. Now, this appears to be a bug. You can see those people aren't moving. Many times you actually look from far away, you'll be able to see that. Also here, just on this trail, you can see different places where they've actually put down walking for when it's slick, and even reinforced the right and left sides with stones to stop those mudslides that have gone on here. This is very cool. Everywhere you go, that looks like a face. That's not a face, but that looks like a face. See, one of the things that Forbidden West does even better than Horizon Zero Dawn is it adds some mystery into the game. Really, when you look at it, you got to realize that the original game was about the characters living in a post-apocalyptic world that was actually going towards another apocalypse. It's a dual apocalyptic world. And they've separated so many years that really everybody thinks the technology is God's. They think the technology is spiritual. And here, there's so many little hidden things that you can even trick yourself. I thought that was a face when I looked at that. Speaking of far off distances, if you look right in the corner of this valley, way over there, there is a spot. I'll try to get to that in this video. Again, I'm showing you less than 1%. No matter how far I walk, I'm going to probably try to get this to be an hour, maybe 2 hours, will depend on how much I have to say. So I'm on the performance mode because the fidelity mode had some issues, and sometimes you won't get drawing. There we go. You won't get drawing sometimes, and it'll just sort of pop in. It's definitely something I thought might just be the PS5, but I actually ended up finding other people who had it. It's just, unfortunately, a little bit of a glitch there, especially with Guerrilla Games. We know they're going to patch it. I did have to bring it up in my report. I don't think you guys need to worry about it. So what I want to do is I want to show you water. Yes, I'm going to show you something that blows my mind. Fully modeled fish in the water. It's crazy how detailed they are. And this is just one part of underwater that I'm going to talk about during this video. But it is phenomenal. Also, I'll talk a little bit about leaving tracks there in the lily pads or in those floating. But watch this. You go down, you look. It is crazy how detailed they've actually got the fish in this game. I'm gonna go in. I'm gonna try to swim here. Go down a little bit and go into photo mode so you can see this. These creatures, they're fully modeled. Not only that, you'll see bubbles coming up. There we go. All this kind of stuff. It is absolutely nuts. I don't go into photo mode that often, but I wanted to do it for you guys. So if I mess up a little bit in photo mode, I apologize. But I don't know if this is true or not. I actually looked, and I swear to God, I could see the difference between, on one particular fish that I owned, the difference between a male and a female. I could be wrong on that, but I was just stunned at the amount of detail these guys have put in. Especially when you're walking, you'll actually notice that there's dirt puffing up underwater where your feet are, mud. And here, of course, you'll see that you can actually destroy the little tiny plant that grows in any shallow water. Now, it will come back. There's sort of this area in which you make an effect as Aloy. And this area slightly changes in fidelity mode, which is your 4K, versus the performance mode, which is aiming for 60 FPS and hitting 1800p, but it's actually a dynamic. You'll see some of that. When the developers were originally talking about what they wanted to do and their desire to make sure that there were creatures that were engaging for Aloy, they originally had Aloy riding a horse. I don't know if you guys are aware of that, but in the first game, they were originally going to have horses in the game. And they decided, as they were creating this, Aloy had a horse for at least a year. And then they decided, hey, let's remove the horse so that the player can ride the creatures. By doing that, they decided, hey, can we have boars? Can we have bears? Can we have larger creatures? And they decided, let's have the large creatures be the robots and any of that kind of cybernetic life form. Let's have the smaller creatures be the ones that the tribes use. I think that that is awesome. One of the reasons why is because using that geography, using the way the animals would be used by the people, you change the actual look of the characters and what they can use. I love this right here. Got a little bit of a washout of the road, and they've just covered it with these boards. A lot of the tech that went into this is the same tech that went into Horizon Zero Dawn. And when you look back at tech, you can see some of their GDCs, some of the stuff that they've discussed. One of the greatest parts of their tech is the ability for their artists. They built out this ability for their artists to basically paint any kind of vegetation that they wanted, and it would actually build around roads. So the people who are making the characters do their things, making them go on quests, could still have a road down, and the artist could come later and paint in plants, and those plants would know not to go into particular roads, and they could actually choose what kind of plants and what kind of areas that they wanted, more tropical, more swamp, and so forth. And you can see that here. This is awesome. The way that they've done this and the way that they've made the system means that a person who put that down can then have the artist come in later and actually do what you've seen here, which is where the forest does actually encroach a bit on that road. So the artists still have full control. It's just that procedurally, you can put stuff down very quickly. And I think that's one of the reasons why Forbidden West can feel so dense. And talking about the plants and the animals and just the overall way the world is built, I didn't see as much of this in the original game, so I want to bring this up. This kind of thin moss is highly detailed in this game. It is mind-blowing how detailed all of the foliage is in this game. And what they've actually done is made sure that, for the most part, the colors match the dyes that you can actually get or what you can do. This is actually interesting because when settlers arrived in America, they actually found out that Native American dyes were not holding their color. And those colors would fade incredibly quickly because they weren't using mordants to actually attach them. And they found out that salt can work. But since salt is so damned expensive in so many places, you sort of had to decide, do you want to really good dye that stuck into something, or did you not worry about it so much? And I like that the developers took all of this into account, because you see that when you go and you pick the various different flowers, they actually named inside of the inventory as gold or red and that kind of stuff. So but you have all these different plants that these different tribes would use. And you see that in the face masks as well, or the face paint that you see in Aloy. Now, talking about the creatures for a minute, as they decided what creatures they wanted to do, this was highly interesting to me. I think that their visual indications that they give the gamer are probably the best I've seen in a game. They're not incredibly detailed or incredibly difficult to parse. Blue, of course, meaning that the creature is not in an alert status. Yellow, meaning that they are in an alert but not combat status. And then red. And this is something where we can see this all the time. It's not really that unknown. We see it in other games. But what works here is that these creatures are so goddamn detailed. I'm going to show you that. What I'll do is I'll get one to ride, and I'll show you using photo mode just how detailed these creatures are, because they actually have yellow already in them. And so there's this cool sort of acceleration you see where the characters got yellow and blue already, but when you see the big eyeball on the front of that turn a bright yellow, you sort of know that's the main thing. And that's one of the things that they've done so well with color work, is you can see here so far off, you can see those torches so far off, you can see the color on different stuff. What they've done is decided, what is it that we want to show the gamer, whether it be the creatures or whether it be something in the distance. Let me go ahead and grab this guy. Let me stealth grab him. Look at the detail in there. I'm going to ride this guy away so that he doesn't come in and attack me. Now, I'm going to show you guys this creature because we've seen him before. I won't show you anything really of the new creature, maybe one or two of the new creatures, but I'm going to keep it very lean. But one of the things I love so much about the way that Horizon has always got their creatures to fit within the game world is that they're always doing something. These guys have these saw blades that allow for them to churn up the dirt. Take that dirt in, and here in photo mode, like I said, I don't use photo mode that much. Let me sort of jump in here, show you photo mode. But in photo mode, you can see that not only do the creatures have this undercurrent, these various different wires and gears and stuff underneath, and that exoskeleton on the outside, but you can actually see pumps going from the front to the mid-gut, and then from the mid-gut to the back actual battery station. There's the chainsaw front end as well. It's just phenomenal design work. Additionally, the Horizon Zero Dawn devs, prior to making Forbidden West, when they were making Horizon Zero Dawn, they actually talked to biology professors and were like, what is it about creatures? What is it about evolution itself that maybe isn't necessarily perfect in creatures? Maybe that an AI or maybe that some kind of system would fix. Funny enough, the first thing they brought up was that skeletons on the inside of a fleshy mass is a bad idea. You break a bone, most likely that's the end of your life. And so what they decided to do was put that armor on the outside. And by putting the armor on the outside and the fleshy parts on the inside, they made a game mechanic. By doing that, they also allowed for them to identify exactly how they were going to handle the collection systems, which is the person killing the creatures, taking their armor, and putting it on themselves. These wires that go from the front into the alert status. And by the way, if you look, they go into the spine, almost like that's their nervous system that you can see. When they were designing all this and they were deciding, okay, we want it to be more like a crustacean, we want it to do all this, we still need to give visual information to the player. And that's where you do see these pipes, you do see the blades, things that you sort of understand as a gamer, you see the color, but you can also track pretty much what's going on inside the creature as well. There we go, there's the gut bag, look at that. You can actually see those go into it, up, around, and into that back battery. Now, I'm not quite sure about the two tails. My assumption is those are just like what you would see on a car where you're not wanting to kick up rocks, and instead of one tail, they decided with biology and AI running it, the AI would say, well, why not have two tails to stop rocks from coming up? The tail is also there to protect the anus, so I have no clue. By the way, that would be an uncomfortable horse to ride. This is just a really good design for a creature, and what's so interesting is this is one of the first designs. Not the first, but it's from the first game, an original design, and they've already sort of stepped it up. I'm gone. So I moved that forward because I don't want you guys to see any of the special attacks if you want to buy them and you want to feel like you're not spoiled. I am really trying to make sure that this is not spoilered. Moving forward here, I wanted to show you guys the quarry because this is one of the places where the city that I showed you at the starting, or I guess I would generously say that's a town, and this place here, this quarry, are connected by various different parts, which was really interesting to me how they did this, and we don't see it. One of the games that I would say would be the closest is Assassin's Creed Origins did a very good job with making things feel merged. I love that crane. Now, you'll see multiple counterweight cranes. You'll see cranes that are lifting stone. You'll see the ones or the pulley weights that you'll see on the bridges. They just do a phenomenal job. But there you see the rafts that have come down river. Just a really cool, simple thing for them to add. Put the stone there to make the gamer realize if they came from, which they would probably because this is near the starting of the game, they come from that original town and they see this and it feels like everything's connected. This is also cool because one of the things that you find out is that, you know, there have been earthquakes, there have been different things like that. And so this quarry, you can actually see, while this place is fine, there's some damage. I believe this is the right quarry. There should be some damage up here that you can see that sort of hints that this has suffered some seismic damage at some point. Look at that. That little tiny log up there to stop the thing from rolling forward when the entire rail cart, yeah, there we go, when the entire rail cart stops. When you see a lot of games, you see a lot of open world games, a lot of times what will happen is they will show you the general, I guess, let me try to get up here. They will show you, nope, we'll go around. They'll show you the general gist of some particular construct in the game, like the sawmill that we saw in Skyrim. But a lot of times, the closer you look, the less there is. With the Guerrilla Games developers, what they've done is almost said, let's go one detail level deeper. And then it's almost like they had another team and said, hey, you guys, why don't you go another level deeper? And when they did that, then they got another group and said, let's go one more deeper. Everything about it, even looking up there, you can see not only the coiled rope design, which the developers have talked about all the way back from the original game, but also the different counterweights, the way everything's put together. Look at this, sand here, drop down to allow you to not lose your footing when you go up a steep ramp. Little stuff, let me see if that actually leaves footprints, now that I think. It does, yeah. I don't know. That impresses me that it leaves footprints. Speaking of impressive, in a lot of games you'll see that title pop up and it'll say quarry, and you will see some various elements of a quarry there, but they know that by you seeing it as a title, they've sort of informed you. And a lot of companies don't have the time or manpower, resources, or tools to sort of go this extra step, and they do. Yeah, there we go. So yeah, some floating rocks. You're gonna see that. I mean, in a game this big, one of the things I was telling people is in a game this big, you will see just more bugs. It's happened, and it's just something that we unfortunately have to be prepared for. Like I said, Guerrilla is on top of it, I'm sure. You can see tools left behind as they chiseled these different parts out. You can see all these characters moving around. They do have different character beats for the different times of day as well as different jobs from what I can tell if it's raining versus sunny, because sometimes you'll see characters doing particular things when it's rainy and not when it's sunny. I could be wrong on that, but there's been a couple times where I've noticed it, and it wasn't a day or night switch, which is particularly impressive because that means they've got multiple systems running and checking. Suicide nets, as well as nets to stop rocks from hitting people on top of the head. But that's just one more additive that they've got here to sort of sell that idea. What's interesting, too, I love these tools here. What's interesting, too, is when you do look at those nets, that kind of stuff, most people aren't going to pick up on that. Most people probably wouldn't care. And a lot of companies work really hard on this, but with Guerrilla Games in particular, you start to look at these different tribal areas. And like I said, I'll show you two others, maybe one, two others. You just see continual success. You see details of what they've done. You see that actual evidence that this work has been done. Yeah, here's a character washing. Now, they're washing the ground. I love that there's actual suds, or maybe that's just supposedly sand or dirt coming off. But in these areas, sometimes there's a big basin of water, and you will actually see them scrubbing that out as well. This is cool. Oh, yeah, see, some steps have that issue, by the way. I don't know what it is, but it seems like there's just a little bit of an animation hitch that happens on some of these steps. This is a very cool crane right here. Moving stone. I don't know exactly where they're moving that. Everything is just run by somebody doing something. And you'll see those people move, stop. From what I can understand, too, the developers had stated that in some tribes, like I had said before, there aren't necessarily specialists because the tribe may not have enough people to do so, or may not be in a place that's successful enough for them to do so. They may need jack-of-all-trades kind of characters and kind of people. I'm sure somebody's going to bring up Legend of Zelda when I do that. There's many elements to this game that do remind you of Zelda. It's not just this. There's some stuff I will probably talk about but won't show you because I don't want to spoil it. But there are a lot of elements within this game that do share their very DNA with Zelda, and I think that that's fine. So the comparisons that you're most likely going to see are something that I think actually fits. Constellations. If you have HDR, by the way, you definitely want to have it on for this game. Phenomenal HDR when it comes to the way it's set up, especially because of these distance lights. You see all the different effects here. And you see that, again, they've chosen a very smart LOD. They've chosen a really intelligent way and what they want to give to players. Because in a lot of games, these lights wouldn't actually be noticeable. What I'm actually trying to do is get my horsey. Yeah, let's call my steed. Yes, if somebody asks, the steed does teleport in. If you have, let's say, gone over a place where the steed wouldn't normally be able to go, you can usually cross a mountain, cross a ravine, and then whistle, and the creature will come to you. They're not trying to really penalize somebody. Look at that. You know, I tease Todd Howard a lot for saying if you see it, you can go there. Horizon Forbidden West is massive, and there are vistas in this game that are truly awe-inspiring. They are stunning to the point to where you think when you see it, you're like, there is no possible way that is actually architecture that I can go to. That is actually a castle I can ride my, electric steed to. And every time you can. And it's just phenomenal work. Speaking of riding, a lot of people have, especially in the first game when you run all the time, I always joke about you get those characters that can't run at all, just the pork-eating bastards who don't look like they can walk more than 10 feet. And Aloy, of course, can run forever. If you look, Native American message runners were reported to travel 50 to 75 miles a day. And when the Spaniards kicked the shit out of the Aztecs had sent runners when they originally landed to tell their king. Now, they ran in a relay, but they got 260 miles relay fashion spread between them to get and to inform the king that the Spaniards had dropped in. I just think that that's very cool. Especially when you see these characters, it makes you feel like you don't necessarily need to jump on the back of any of these creatures if you don't want to. I'm not going to spoil anything for this game, but I will say that the prey mechanics that we saw in the original game do get some upgrades here with a couple different creatures. They had a visual language that they wanted to sort of inform the player of the states of those creatures, like I said before, with the colors. But what they also wanted to do was make sure that these creatures and their designs also fed back into the quests, like I said, the world itself, how you would use their parts. And they did a lot of study on how different systems work together in the animal and bug kingdoms, and how some animals work together, one for alert, that kind of stuff. I think that's very cool, and it certainly pays off. You certainly do see those creatures that are the alert creatures within the larger groups of creatures, and it does make you feel like that character is the guard. And when you see a group where there is no guard, you're like, hey man, that's something that I can take advantage of. So I'm going to jump to a different location. Again, not ruining anything for you guys. There are so many locations in this game. It is such a minute part that I'm going to show you. But I wanted to show you how the artists have made sure for the gamer to understand, and this is something that they did in the original game as well, to make a gamer understand that it's an apocalypse after an apocalypse. Now, we know what's going on with Aloy and the current, but what they've done is made sure that nothing is just propped down. Every single bit of that prior apocalypse you can see jutting from the earth. You can see dirt, debris, all of the systems there that makes it feel like it just came out of the ground or was shoved into it. And then you see a vista like this. And everything looks like it exists naturally in this. You couldn't tell me that seeing this on the wall, you wouldn't think it was art. And of course, video games are art, but you get my drift that this is one of those fantastic moments that you see in a game. And again, I'm not ruining this for you. In fact, I actually came from an area that you probably wouldn't actually go this route. You could, but it may not be something that a lot of people would see in the very way. The fact that all of these items are put down and put together just makes them feel more organic. It's something that the developers just understand. You'll even see it with the river system, and I'm going to talk about in a little bit. The way they've worked on the textures, the way they made sure the plant life and everything sort of works together. Again, nothing being just plopped down. All of it looking like something happened. And that's one of the things I've talked about in other Walking the Walks. You can see the Witcher one where I talk about it, Dying Light recently, as well as many others, where that ability for a player who's playing in the present can see the past, but also understand where the future is going, what they need to do. You see that next spot. And in a game like this, I can honestly tell you, at times you'll see so much that there will be moments where you're like, where am I supposed to go? Using that quest marker is very intelligent because it will direct you. If you are a person who usually sees that tower in the distance and says, that's where I'm going, well, guess what? A lot of times there's this many things in the distance. It can be a little difficult for you to realize where to go. But it also showcases something that I think even Zelda had an issue with, and that's that every single place in this game looks like a place you want to explore. No expenses were skipped. It's that they made sure that you want to go there. The fog is real. Everything here that's picturesque, whether it be their new cloud system, the fog, the debris, the particles, the red plague I'll talk about in a second, which is one of the main cruxes of the narrative, they all push you forward and they all make you want to go and explore. And you never feel like there's a wasted moment in the game. Another part of this that we'll see in a bit is when you look at the way the robots are set up, where they are, and sort of what they're set up to do in particular areas, it makes them feel very much like a threat, which is what the developers had wanted to do with the original game. And I think they did well, but in this game, I think is a step above. Now, when you see these militaristic robots, here's a little fun fact for you. A lot of these robots and their designs are more of that militaristic, almost Killzone style. That was actually the way the game was originally going before they decided to switch it up and have these tribes and the dinosaur robots and all that kind of stuff. The original plan and the original designs were actually these sort of militaristic robots, and only later did they look and say, hey, let's change that up. But what they did was they kept the military designs for a lot of the AI stuff that happened in the backstory and the fighting between the corporations, and put those here so you can see this ancient battlefield and sort of look at it and be like, what the hell happened here? Now, speaking of what happened here, you're probably seen the Red Plague, so let's talk about that for a second. That's a flyer we've seen before, but I won't fight him. I'll talk to you about overall this place and the red plague. So this red plague, this red disease is spreading across the land, and what it's doing is it's actually killing the animals. Now remember that Aloy and everybody, they may actually ride the creatures, use them for armor, but they actually use the creatures, the actual living ones, for food, of course, and for clothing. The problem with this is this red plague is actually damaging the ground itself. It sucks out the actual color. You'll see that in places. Also, strangely enough, a lot of native tribes believe that nightmares, black and white, that's sort of the lack of color. When you look at ancient myths, a lot of them involve locations that are overtly colorful, and when that lack of color happens, it's actually sort of ends up pervading this feeling of death, and I like that when you see that black plague sticking up. Sort of trying to get around to this creature. Oh, whoa, that's floating in the air. That shouldn't be there. Yeah, see, you can see some of this stuff. Again, it is a big, giant open world, but there's definitely some cleanup that needs to happen in some of these locations, as you can see. Stuff that you didn't see as much in Horizon Zero Dawn, I don't believe. Personally, I just didn't feel like as many of these issues popped up. But this red plague that's spreading around, it's your job as Aloy to sort of discover what exactly is the cause and stop it, and you'll see creatures that are dying or dead in it. You'll also see some natives chanting at it like they're trying to figure out if it's some angry god or something that they've done wrong. This is something that we see in the original game, and in Forbidden West they really step it up a notch and make you feel like there's this moment where Aloy has a ton of data in her brain. She knows things, but she can't tell everybody because she doesn't know how they'd accept it. This is something that in the original game happened a ton, and in this game, Aloy trusts people a little bit more, but you still see that pop up. How much can you tell people that it's not a god, that it's actually this thing that happened prior, and what are you going to do to the entire civilization? And what damage will that do to the civilization? And that is something that does come up a bit in this game. Whoops, didn't mean to hit the focus. I do like that some changes to the focus have happened this time in the game. Certainly when you focus in on creatures, it's easier to parse their data. The Forbidden West, they really stated that they wanted to make that easier for gamers, and I think they did a very good job of that, very good job of figuring that out, and how to sort of make it that it was layered, that the data was there, but at the same time, just cleaner than it was in the prior game. Of course, this is the performance mode, so you won't see some really advanced reflections, waves on some of these water elements. But in my experience, it's just the more solid of the performing too, so I choose that. As I move here, you're going to start to see some changes to the plant life, some changes to the actual geology itself, the rocks, the strata, all that kind of stuff. And I'll try to show you a little bit of the desert as well. It's really a step up, really a phenomenal way that they handled all this. Their translation between multiple places in this game and just multiple vegetations, multiple different areas, the way that irrigation happens in some of the tribal areas is just phenomenal. It's a really nice, slick way. You'll also see it when you travel sometimes. You'll see the signs of habitation before you get to a city a great deal of times, and it sort of gives you that more natural, I'm sliding into civilization versus just boom, here's a city. And that natural translation actually continues. Look at those waterfalls. Just phenomenal. It looks like a painting that's moving. So one thing I want to talk about with the Red Plague that I think is very cool, the way that they handled it. I know that some people are going to have an issue with this, and you'll see those dead creatures, and some people won't like that, some people will, but it allows the developer to push a player through some areas that I actually feel might be experienced too slowly. There's some large areas where this is there, and if you walk across it, it slightly damages you. It takes a long time, but it does damage you. So your desire will be to run across it, and it's really enjoyable in this way because it can make the player experience that moment without sort of dallying around, without taking too long. It's a large space. It's not wasted anymore because there's something you're engaging with, and instead that space sort of becomes this tense moment of movement and decision making. It's not lethal, but it's a little bit bothersome. You can see here the animation when she's walking up. This is something I talked about with Witcher 3. I think they did a phenomenal job with the actual feeling of weight that a character has when they're moving, the sound where if you're walking right or left, you actually hear the different sound of materials with his feet. So maybe his foot on the left is on ice and on the right is on rock, and you actually hear that. These transitions between locations, This is probably the first game where I just wanted to walk around and look for hours. It's happened in Origins. I certainly enjoyed Odyssey. Valhalla had its moments, but this game has everything as a moment. It's quite interesting to see, especially as you continue on. Look at that. So that red plague has seeped into the water and discolored the water. It is so phenomenal as a design decision to do that, because the water for these characters is sort of the lifeblood. If you look in the tavern, not only are there various different poultries and that kind of thing, but you will actually see fish. And you saw fish when I first showed you sort of have these signs of aquatic life, and you see this plague in there. And if you've actually looked prior, you know that this stuff kills any living creature sort of comes in contact with. And so you know, just by looking at that, you know automatically, naturally, that that's a very dangerous thing for them to be in. As we move from the more, I guess, tree-like, whoops, okay, let me get, all right, there we go. What was I saying? Oh, as we're moving from the forested area to the drier area, one of the things that you're going to actually see is that a lot of the stone monuments, that kind of stuff, are actually still remaining here, especially if they're not in windy areas where that erosion would happen. You start to see less moss-covered stuff. Also, when it comes to the water, this is something I found out. We'll probably be able to find one real quick. They're not too difficult to find, but you actually see where changes in the riverbed. Actually, there we go. So look at this turbulent water here. This water, you can actually see that little ridge of rock, and you can see the water coming over it and actually twisting in place, that turbulent water. That is phenomenal detail to see in a game. And you'll see multiple different places where the water system is actually working to not only create these swirls, but also to, let's say, create turbulent water at rapids, to show stagnant water. And in many ways, it reminds me of the wind systems that they created for the original game that have been augmented here, which is just sort of a force over the top of the caustics to get you the water detail. I would love to know exactly how they've done it, because there's a real weight to the water. In some places, very rarely, you actually see two sort of bits of a creek separate and come back together. And when they do, you actually see sort of the water hit and swirl around, or hit and sort of become stagnant. And I don't know if it was on purpose, but it looks really cool when you see it, because it's just that one of the times where nature didn't work exactly the way it was supposed to. I like this dam. This is, I can't remember the name of this town, unfortunately. It might show me a placard when I get up here. But what I liked about it was you can see sort of the change in the tribal patterns. You can see more stonework here than existed in the past, where the quarries and the places that existed that we were just at almost felt like they were supplying themselves a little bit, but sort of selling that rock down river. And you actually see that replicated here as we move further on. That's what I figured. So I jumped to the next place because that spot actually had a couple NPCs in it that might end up spoiling some stuff. I like the lightning bugs or fireflies, depending on what you say, to sort of give you information about the stealth. One of the things about the game that I've talked about in the prior title as well as this one is that dual layer of information that you get, which is funny because lightning bugs or fireflies, depending on where you are, also has a dual term. So fireflies are usually in the west of the United States, and then lightning bugs are usually in the east, where there is more lightning. That's usually what you'll see people call them. There are some regional terms for them as well, but you definitely see that dual use of information. You also see it with the butterflies, which I just think are absolutely hilarious, how butterfly-filled this world is. As we start moving through this area, I think it's one of the more enjoyable places to explore as somebody who just likes to see the way that cities are built, the differences between the tribes that you see here. So this particular tribe puts their villages inside of the large radio telescope dishes that are in the world, that have existed throughout that older apocalypse into this world. Now, it's interesting when you look at dishes. In Russia, they have a dish, and it's set in the ground. It's actually one of the radio dishes that are set in the ground. That's 1,890 feet wide. That's like 6 football fields. And then the larger filled aperture one is in China. That's like 1,600. But when you look at standing, fully movable ones, you have one that's called the Bird Green bank telescope, and that I think is like 360 by 330 feet or something. That's 3.5 football fields wide, long, for people to actually sort of build up in it. And you can see how huge they are and their ability to not only carry that lattice structure, but also when we jump up in there and look, you'll sort of see that rattan wicker home feeling that they've built within this actual village, which is completely different and connected them with bridges. I love this spot too because we start to see a change in the tribes and start to see them go more towards the ecological. We see farms planted, or fields at least, tribesmen doing more specific things in this area than they were in the past. As we started and I talked about, it seems like some of those locations, depending on where they are, a lot of those characters will sort of move around and do any job. And here, and especially later on, we'll start to see characters that have very specific things that they're doing. Even the sleeping arrangements in this area is different. Now, I talked about the Red Plague and that sort of seeding out and pushing a person through a location. What I like here is it's out there, it's in the fields, it's killing those fields. You'll sometimes see people out here praying, but it also allows you to walk, if you want to, through the actual paths. Oh, there's some people praying right there on the left and sort of lamenting the dying of their crops and what exactly is going on around them. It's a very cool feel because it's like nothing really that we saw in the prior games. Even in Frozen Wilds, we saw some places that were frozen, some places that were, dangerous for people to live. But here we actually see this secondary apocalypse start to show up, because that's really what's actually occurring here, is a secondary apocalypse. So I'm going to go up onto this so you can see just the size of one of these telescopes, how massive they are. And when you look at their lattice structure, when you look at the way that they're created and that steel has lived through that apocalypse, the idea that the natives would use something to build on this is sort of like the difference and the opposite of what we saw with the creatures that I talked about earlier, especially when you combine that with that skeletal structure that we've talked about, which is sort of the soft over bone that the biologists were telling the developers probably wasn't the smartest way of doing things. We see sort of that having to be replicated here. We also see it with the humans putting carapaces on, putting on the parts of the different creatures that they kill, but also with these small villages that are set up in here. We see the same thing going on. We see them using rattan and a wicker interwoven way of building things that is highly flexible, super strong, but at the same time uses the structure beneath them to sort of build up. And we see their location out there. And it's cool to see that sort of safety. We've seen the safety that was built out in other places, whether it be the drawbridges with the spikes on the side to sort of cover and be safe from people or other tribes. Here we see what you would sort of consider to be an Ewok village kind of thing. And once again, we get multiple vistas. What I love about this is no matter what I show you, it's 1/1,000,000th of the game. There's so many vistas, so many things to see, the breadth of how to even enter any one particular area. There's so many locations. So again, don't really worry. There is just a ton in this game. And no matter what I show you, you're going to see 1,000 things that I won't get a chance to show you. But I thought it was very interesting to show you this because it does show the differences in where those tribes are and what the developers decided when they wanted to build these tribes out and put them geography-wise into a spot and then see how they would build out. What I like about this is where these radio telescopes actually are, they do have giant fields around them. So the idea of doing that. But what we notice here is they've actually built a moat. And I'll try to find, there's actually an inlet in this location where the water gets into this moat. But they've not only got their fields out there, they've sort of got a moat to protect them as well, which I thought was super interesting. But what they've done is still contained that original location and just showed how the world might change a bit. Going underwater here, you can see, by the way, how exactly perfect this location is versus anywhere else that you explore that is not man-made. You will notice that right away, the changes in how that underwater area looks. And I'll show you some more underwater spots in a second. So this is called Plainsong. This is one of many villages in the game. But what they've done is they've sort of gone up, and you actually even see water in some of the areas where they're planting different kinds of crops or where they have just growth coming up. It's a very cool way of sort of delineating your verticality in your game and showing that not only in the flat areas, yes, it's flatter than up on the dish, but also showing just a bit of water there in the depressed areas to give you that feeling that this area may actually flood in particular times as well. Something we saw in Assassin's Creed Origins when they were building on the Nile. And we know that the Nile flooded multiple times, and you would see multiple different sort of setups for different times of the year. And we see that here. We also see the changing of the structure of what they're using here. This is a more verdant area than where we started, and you start to see a lot more actual natural woods being used. You see what you would say is very close to a bamboo, as well as rattan, and then a lot of leaves, a lot of palm leaves, a lot of different leaves that they use, not only for their armor, but also for various different elements to create shade in this location. And you can see that trade-off where initially we started out and you see a lot of different characters using the armor, the smaller elements of skins and different creatures. And here we start to see a huge changeover to the more vegetative style of clothing, warmer versus colder clothing environments, and what a character would use. So as I walk up in here, rattan is a material that's actually fascinating. Now we see this in Egypt, Rome, China. That's some of the first places where we saw it. Rattan, it's a climbing vine. So it's like a sort of a vine that climbs. It has a palm-like structure to it, and it grows in rainforests. This is somewhere around 600, I think, species in the world, although it's got a solid core, which is unlike bamboo, which is hollow. It's also very, very pliable, and they steam it to actually allow for them to sort of sew it and put it in the wicker fabric or the wicker pattern. A lot of people get confused and think rattan is actually an item and so is wicker. Wicker is the way in which they're put together. And it grows incredibly fast. And so you can see a lot of that reusability here in the way they've done everything. I also love that they've got, and you can see that they have an overabundance of water in this location, something we do not see in other places. We actually end up having quests in the desert areas to get water. Yet this tribe actually has so much water, they have sort of fountain drinking areas right in the center. And as we saw in the first place, there was no need for a well. So you don't have that well with the sink stone to pull down the pail. You actually see these sort of nice, verdant looking areas that actually translate directly into where you're actually living and walking. I think the texture work here is great. They've got that moss sort of feeding in particular parts to show that nature, people walking, you'll end up having seeds on your boots, your feet, your clothing. That'll get out into this. And that's actually a place where it can actually grow because there is some nutrient there. What's interesting about rattan itself is it is incredibly useful in so many ways. In Italy, scientists have actually been trying to use it as artificial bone structure because creating artificial bones for people is very difficult. You can create something that's super strong, but then that wears down the bone it connects to. There's all kind of issues. But with rattan, they can actually heat this in a cooker. They add calcium and they add carbon, and then later add phosphate, and it binds to the rattan like a lattice, a bone lattice, an actual structure that the original bone can grow into. And they've done experiments in, I think it was goats, no, it was sheep, and the immune systems of the sheep didn't fight this at all, and actually you see that bone structure, the real natural bone, growing into it and replacing it over time. And that's one of the things that they've done multiple studies for that. It's just very cool to see. Also in this location, you're going to see baskets, you're going to see all kinds of different designs for everything, as well as end knits, which is where you run to the end of your rattan. How are you going to weave that together? And they've sort of done different different little, I guess you would call them artistic bits here. And I love that you can actually see the edges here where it's all woven, and this part's actually open. You can see some openings there that look like it's almost bamboo in some sections in that, though. Also, rattan is hard enough, as well as bamboo, to actually be hilts and shafts for swords, which we see in some areas here. Stuff's crazy useful, but it's also super light. And I think that they picked a great way of merging these and putting them in this world and allowing them to have them on these discs, because these discs, of course, 130, more than 140 tons on their own, the ability for them to hold these kind of things, whether true or not, at least fits thematically with what they're trying to do with this location and this area. And that's one of the first things I noticed coming here, is that these little villages are incredibly complex. They're weaving up. And the reason why, of course, is because you can't go outside of the dish itself too far, because then you are just using the structure of the actual rattan. So what they've done is they've sort of kept it within the disc structure and built it vertically up using the base, the spine, as that pressure point. And so you see these sort of climbing ways. And when you go in here for a couple quests, it can actually be a little confusing. Now, anybody who is any kind of engineer immediately sees a second story, third story swimming pool and knows how difficult swimming pools can be to put in multiple story places and that kind of stuff. I was actually quite surprised to see this here. Haven't done any measurements to look to see how much actual weight that is and the pressure, because that would be incredible. Also went to the bottom and looked up to see if I could see sort of the bottom of this swimming pool, and didn't see it. I could have just missed it, because most likely it's actually in the game. It's probably just behind a wall or something. But I love this, and it is actually possible for it to hold if it's woven tight enough and with multiple layers to actually hold water like that. It wouldn't hold it forever. There'd be some leakage. And I just don't quite know the actual usefulness of that, but I think it's such a great sort of aspect to this place. And then you get one more vista. One more amazing part. It looks like Larry Elmore. It looks like Frank Frazetta. It looks like Braum, any of your amazing fantasy artists from the 1980s, 1990s that we saw a lot of times if you were, let's say, a D&D fan or a role-playing fan of any kind. And we see that here with these huge vistas, but it's in a game, and it's so crazy that you can explore all these places in one title. And that's what Forbidden West does, is it merges everything, and it's not necessarily hugely larger, but what it is much more dense with the locations you can go to. I love that fog and steam coming up in the early mornings, all of that changing depending on the time frames, and just this look around and seeing all these different locations. There you can see Little Tiny Village in and of itself over there on the third one away. I think I'll just probably jump off here. Because what I do want to show you guys is, there we go, that's the inlet. I wanted to show you guys this inlet. This is crazy. So they actually built up an inlet in here so you can see the river coming. And it's not perfectly with the flow of the actual current, but it's close enough to actually make it feel real. And you can see that they've channeled this water to create this sort of natural barrier for their area by taking the river, which was farther away, and channeling it through here. And I just thought when I first saw this, I was completely stunned. I won't spoil a lot about what goes on underwater. There is some pretty crazy stuff. It's not only traversal, it's encounters with creatures. There's going to be some stuff maybe I'll show you at a beach at the end of this. If I get a chance, I'll go to the beach. But some of the stuff that goes on here, and once again, you see that red plague moving into the actual water and the inlet, which doesn't seem to make an effect to the water going all the way through, which I thought was a little interesting. I don't know if that's just something they missed or didn't want to do. But when you look at the water caustics, how they end up handling the ripples, the waves, and have them impacted by whatever they're actually touching in the game. Phenomenal work here. Just a stunning presentation of how water actually moves. And from here, I think we'll jump to a different spot. And now we're sort of in the jungle prime. As somebody who's played a lot of games, and I'm sure a lot of you guys watching this, it is crazy to see the amount of detail on a single tree in this game. And also we start to get, especially in the jungle, you start to get a lot of the symbols of the past. You'll see jet fighters, or you'll see different parts of structures, a lot of them flying craft that have sort of landed and the jungle has overgrown them. And a word of warning, sometimes, especially in the jungle, you get the occasional load or streaming stutter on the PS5, especially in fidelity mode. I'm in performance mode, but occasionally you might see that in the game. It can happen in any place. It just happens irregularly. So if that pops up, I apologize. It's just one of the things that you sort of have to come to grips with. But when I was talking about water, how water works around all of these locations, what they do to make sure that each location looks differently. When the developers were creating the editor, they wanted to create this editor that a person who wanted to quickly iterate something could do so, and then an artist could come in and was able to change anything around them. And they came up with a very cool GPU procedural generated sort of plant life system, foliage system. And what they did was they had these ecotypes, these actual types like jungle, your desert, those kind of things. But what they did is they actually wrote in code and figured out a way to where not only could a person who just wants to create a very quick trail and see how that trail would look in the jungle, they could also then switch quickly to desert by just switching out a brush. Now we see some of this stuff already coming about, especially in Unreal 5 and some other things. We're starting to see some huge increases, but this was many years ago, and it was many years prior to Horizon Zero Dawn even coming out. However, at the time, their claim to fame was that they had figured out a way to get it like this, and they could also let an artist come in and adjust anything, and the game would go and procedurally generate around that and fix any errors. So if an artist did want to put in a bridge like this, and I also love that this bridge is different. It's got the animal hides over, they're rotted out. It's got a completely different look than the other ones. But they were able to allow the artist to go in, drop things in, and it would actually adjust around them so that they wouldn't have to worry about going in and having a ton of different errors. Because one of the things people don't realize is, let's say somebody goes in and changes a rock. If the system isn't able to adjust for that, it may push out a bush, which then pushes out more shrubbery, which then pushes out trees, and the trees are now on the side of a mountain, and it doesn't look realistic. So what they did is they worked very hard on putting everything together, and making sure that you could sort of get this solidified system that the artists, the developers, everybody could go and do. Not only that, they actually had people just creating their own for the fun of it and posting pictures. You can see this on one of their GDC videos where they had people just go into the editor and make what they wanted so that it could see it. Now, as we go into the jungle area, I love that Aloy actually indicates everywhere she is. We start to see these different dyes being used, and as I started at the starting of the video and talked about dyes, you see different changes to the dyes depending on the material. This is all really crazy in-depth stuff that they've actually tracked, but you'll also start to hear Aloy say things like how hot she is and how sweaty she is, how it's just not comfortable in this location. You start to see this rain, especially in this spot. You see this rain and you don't see her celebrated as much. She does put her hand out occasionally, but it just feels like with that little bit of verbiage as well as some other things going on, it starts to make you feel that cloying, wet, soggy feel that anybody who lives in a jungle will talk about, whether it's jungle rash or something else. It's just, whoa, there's a bug. Somebody just fell from the sky. Again, you will see that in this game. Unfortunately, it's a large game, but there we go. Somebody dropped from the sky into this small location up here. I just wanted to walk up this and show you once again how well they handled the animation too. They've handled all of the kinetics of that body of Aloy. It's something that they made sure in the first part of the game, in the original game that they wanted to do, and they've done so really well here. There's some issues when you traverse rocks that are sort of next to each other, almost like steps. You saw that, I believe, at the starting of this video where I talk a little bit about that. It does happen occasionally. Now here we do see some tribesmen walking in groups of 3. I've noticed that the groups of 3 tribesmen is actually in multiple different places in this game in particular. I'm not 100% sure why. And here we come up and we see specialists now. So in the other smaller villages, you would see a fighting ring or you would see some people practicing sometimes. I like how this is more center point because that's what these guys do. That's what they are. They are more warfare. They are more tribally fighting the other warriors that are around them. And so this is a little bit more front and center. You also see them actually impacting one another. You'll see sometimes they'll drop a weapon. You'll see various different animations. This is something that we see in this game versus a lot of other games where 2 characters will interact as well with one object. I've seen it where somebody's dropped a large box and then another character will pick it up and follow them to a spot and drop it. Whether that's the job system just saying, oh, NPC 1 is not carrying this anymore, NPC 2 sees it quicker or more quickly than NPC 1, I don't know, but it works really well. And then we get these higher, almost, I would say, primal rage kind of looks in the dyes. And you get these stranger colors. You get these aqua greens, everything that reminds you of, I would say, anything like Mayan, Aztec, that kind of stuff, where you see those different changes, those different colors. And once again, you start looking at what they've been using to dye the various different parts. It's funny when you look at a game, there's so much to get wrong. So, for example, when you're creating stuff, indigo destroys silk. I think I talked about that, and you get those kind of things. But if you look at, for example, how different dyes are created and put on stuff, lacquer, which is clear and it protects things, is actually created from a bug that plants its eggs into a resin that it secretes, or a secretion that it has. And when you smash it up, it's red, but people in Vietnam found out that if you added an acid to it, it turned clear and it protected items. And that's actually where it gets its name, lacquer. And though it's mostly synthetic now, that's actually how that came about, was the removal of the color by the acids and some other ways in which they prepared it. This moss, awesome. Look at that. That is such a high resolution look to everything. We talk about this in other games where you get multiple textures overlaying one another, and sometimes you'll have that fake texture for grass. We certainly see that in this game, but that's what we also see. A very high detailed texture system that's underneath the actual structure of the shrubbery itself. And you can see this when you watch their GDC. They talk about how they handle the different bushes, how many LODs they have for the original game. We don't have any information on what they've improved here. I personally believe they've improved a great deal of optimization of some kind, because it seems like it is far more verdant than even the most foliage-filled places in the other games. And here you see some monsters going about their monster business. With this wind and from the original system, they definitely wanted more particle systems in this. You see twisters, you see all manner of weather in this game that, even though Frozen Wilds did add snow. You even see snow in this game. So you've got these huge weather systems and cloud systems that are all real. They're actually doing things. They actually make effects, and they push. They basically are what they call a force field. They basically push the foliage around. And you can read some of the ways in which they do this, how many samples they use, how they go about it so that things feel somewhat real. One of the things you will notice is this smaller, the smaller grasses and stuff, a lot of them don't move. It's usually the larger bits, multiple layers that they've talked about that they use. So you've got like that immobile layer underneath it to sort of give you the green, and definitely some depth there with some browns and different colors. And then above that, you have sort of your line of grass, and that can be a certain level of detail. And then above that, you may have things like the ferns. And then even above that, you'll have your trees. And all of this is running LOD. It's sort of deciding how far away you are. And in the original game, you could see that LOD pretty quickly. It wasn't terrible for that game. In fact, it was pretty stunning, even though you could see it, because nobody had seen a game like that. In this game, it's been pushed out a bit. You certainly do see those distance locations even farther. Look at that. Beautiful. Once again, slightly different day-night kind of cycle. I haven't tested it to see how many minutes you have of daytime, how many minutes you have of night. But this game is not like, let's say, Dying Light 2, where they're pushing that nighttime is super dangerous. So one of the things you will notice, and a lot of people complain about this, is you get a slightly brighter night. You absolutely see that in not only Horizon Zero Dawn, but you see it here in Forbidden West as well. And now you see these new water systems. You can see that water coming off more speedily off of the mountains into these lower sections, and how they move, washing out the different tracks and the different trails. Very cool looking all the way around. With their LOD system, we talk about this a lot of times, like how far can you see? What do you want to travel to? How do you want to travel to it? Does it entice you? Does it cause you to look at it and say, that's a place I want to go? Well, with Forbidden West, there's a lot. There is a lot of stuff that you can see that you may want to go. And there's various different ways that companies go about making sure that a player knows exactly where they want to travel to. They know sort of what they want to go to. They see it. And there's some gamified bits that we see. And you'll hear this brought up, but whether it be a Zelda, an Assassin's Creed, an open world game like a Far Cry, every game does it differently. And one place that this game and the original did it so differently is the tall necks. So when you look at the tall necks, they're a communication class machine in the game. The developers wanted to make sure that the player felt a sense of satisfaction that always wasn't combat-based. And that's why the tall necks require jumping puzzles or a bit of world logic and puzzle solving to sort of complete. Long necks are also completely oblivious to humans, basically, despite the original art we saw, concept stage stuff that showed some hunters taking them down. They're going to stomp on you if you walk in front of them like an AT-AT walker. It's not really trying to. It's just that you are stupid. It's interesting because tall necks have a design that doesn't fit as well as the other machines, I don't think. They're massively armored. They have huge armor plating all around them. Their access point is at the very top. They don't really fit in like a lot of the others. And you see that in the jungle, because there really isn't a lot of places in the jungle where there are tall necks. This is actually more for you in particular to go to vistas and look out. Where some of the creatures have all manner of builds against the humans, the tall necks really don't. And I think that you can see that sort of structure there. They were originally planned to be killable, but they decided that the idea of Aloy smashing down these sort of creatures that didn't do anything, they just performed their natural act and didn't move around, wouldn't make sense. And when you go into the jungle areas, I actually noticed the lack of them. I can't remember if there's one or two. There are some, but it doesn't feel as... It sort of changes it over to Aloy investigating the locations, like you can see here, versus Aloy actually climbing to the top of this and unlocking it all. It's a little bit more about, well, to be honest, about the mystery of the Forbidden West itself, and a little less about getting to a place and having it open up that sort of vista around you. Though, again, it is possible. It's just not as probable in these spots. And I dig that. I actually think that's a good switch up, because it changes the focus as you continue later in the game away from that expected into something slightly different, and requires a little bit more from the player. And talking, about more gamified stuff, something I have to confess, a world this size, many companies, they're going to put those gamified bits down because they want to sort of make sure that you understand exactly where you're going to go, because you can get analysis paralysis that can come up. And that's just simply when the options are too wide. But unlike a lot of other companies, I would add most companies, Forbidden West, Horizon Zero Dawn, they reward you for traveling somewhere. Is there a path? Travel it. At the very least, you're going to find an amazing vista in some of these more out-of-the-way places that will inform you of where something is or your location. And this reminds me of when I did the Walking the Walk for Alan Wake. I've said that while that game didn't become an open world title, it was actually created originally as one, and Remedy ended up going away from that design. The open world itself was still there, though, and it was just made linear by the way they cut it up. And Alan could actually look back. It's one of the very few games where you could look back and you could see where you have gone and where you were going to at any time. And you get that sense of where you were versus where you are, and a sense of progression, a sense of actual travel. And we see that here. Look at that waterfall. Stunning. All of these areas with these massive waterfalls. And of course, everybody's got to look, right? You got to check. Behind every waterfall, is there a chest? No, there is not. There's not always something behind these waterfalls. But I did like that this change up happens in the jungle area and on the beach area, where actually there is one spot on the beach area where there's a tall neck, but for the most part, it's a little bit more focused on the player exploring. And I think that that was a really good decision on their part. I want to check the map there for a second to make sure I was in the right spot so that I can show you some stuff without showing you any spoilers, like I said. So as we move through here, there's going to be a couple more creatures. I'm going to verify that they're not anything that'll be spoiler for you, and make sure that no story bits pop up that are sort of wasteful for you or something that I wouldn't want you to actually be able to see on your own at first. It's crazy in these areas just how all-encompassing the audio goes. And I talked about this in the review. I wasn't necessarily in love with some of the audio settings. I could actually dial this a bit more than I expected. And whether that's an overuse or just the use of the 3D Tempest in the PS5, the actual 3D audio chip and how they've wanted to do things, 3D audio isn't necessarily always that easy to accomplish. And I think that in some games, it's very easy to accomplish, and in other games, it's actually quite difficult, especially when you get that really loud undergrowth sound. That is quite difficult at times to sort of parse everything that's going on. But I've found, at least, I think there's a battle up here, I've found at least for this game, I had to do a little bit more dialing in than I actually thought I was going to have to do, and sort of get it figured out to where I could sort of hear everything around me, how it was going, and it didn't sound, I guess you would say, a little bit artificial. So I'm going to creep up here a little bit, and we'll be able to see, maybe I think there might be a hunter up here fighting these guys. I love here you see this sort of car, and if you look, what you can mistake for trees can be light posts in some of these spots. And it was cool. I was traveling through, I was paying attention, or I thought I was paying attention, and then randomly looked closer and was like, wait, that's not like a tribal post that they put up. That's a lamp post from the apocalypse prior. It's just sitting here and sort of mimics what they said about particular parts of the world do stay up. They just don't, for whatever reason, fall down as easy or decay as quickly. Let's listen to a little bit of audio so you can hear this, and you can sort of maybe hear some of these creature sounds.
It's an ambush!
And because they ambushed a creature, I don't want you guys to see, I'm not going to go ahead and put that in, but they ambushed a creature. You can hear sort of that reverberation, the audio going through the various different locations, how it bounces around you. And I think with people who are playing with a headset, just sort of make sure that you go in and make sure that everything is sort of set up on your PS5 correctly. If you're using the PS5 and you're running it through Dolby, or you're running it through the Tempest 3D, if you're doing it the uncompressed PCM, make sure it's all set up correctly for you. 5.1, it also has a way for you to basically set it up to run 3D audio through your TV if you want. The PS5 has that, to where you take your controller and you set it up, and then the speakers play sounds. You can do that. I'm never really that enticed by how that sounds. When it comes to audio, when it comes to how the game ends up handling that, there are so many different factors for a lot of different games when it comes to if it's guns, if it's bows and arrows, if it's a large creature world where maybe there's a huge amount of that undergrowth sound that you get. A lot of people will see something like a jungle and think, oh, there's going to be no sound there if there's no rain or anything. But even just leaves rubbing against one another, you can actually hear all of that sound. It sort of becomes this cacophony of sound that can end up making 3D sounds then even more difficult difficult to put on top. And you can see a really good GDC from the developers of Gears when they talk about Microsoft's audio system. And they actually have a moment where they play their game with and without 3D sound, and with and without sounds based on the materials around them, the occlusion, which is, of course, if sound, let's say, hits this tree in front of me from the village in front of me, there should be a slight occlusion of that sound, sort of a cutting off, a muting of that sound, because that sound wave stops at the actual wood itself. And you can see all these characters will greet you when you go into different places, greeting you differently depending on if you've met the tribe, if you've done their quests. I also noticed in some of these you have dual. There we go. Dual guards, which I don't think I've seen in a game before. But in these particular, a couple of these villages, I noticed this, like tribe on one side as well as on the other side, which I actually think is quite intelligent, because you're going to funnel your enemies over that bridge anyway, so you might as well have some people there. And in some places, here's another bridge. I don't know if there's people. Yeah, there's a guard there too. So I think that's, I really like that idea. And here we see a different style of village. Even though technically it's not super different than when we saw the people fighting, what you see is one that is actually touching the water very close, and you'll see a lot of that moss growing up the side of the wood. You also will see a lot more trees in these kind of areas and in these villages versus, let's say, the original village we started at, which was using rattan and a lot of leaves. Here, you will see still the leaves for the kids and stuff, but you'll see a lot of wood in a lot of these locations. And I love that when you look, you can tell these are not the constructs of a group or a people that have wood mills in the same way. They're obviously using pieces of, sharpened something to cut this wood, and nothing is ever really perfectly done. I'm sure you'll notice here some occasional glitches. You got the cloak. You'll have some occasional glitches with people walking around in these spots. It's just, you have a lot going on in this game. And I've definitely noticed that because there's so many differences in everything, to make something look organic and built by a group that doesn't have particular manufacturing tools, you will get differences in length to wooden planks. You'll get differences in width, and that, if you're not animating perfectly, can have some issues. See, yeah, I just got caught there. So those are something that we do see. I certainly don't hold it against them, but it's something, you guys know me in the reviews, I'm going to talk about it. So here's another two people fighting, guy throwing a spear, characters just going about their day. This is a little bit more of a militant place where you see sort of the warriors doing the warrior thing. And then sometimes the children and other non-warriors will actually be doing, the collecting and stuff like that. So this spot, when I was looking around here, when I first played the game, and I was sort of walking around and looking at their weapons laid out, and I was just like, this place looks awesome. Like, this is a warrior spot. Let me tell you how even better this is. You come across this and you notice two guards, but there's no way up there. And a person who stands up there is basically going to be looking like they're standing in the mouth of something. And I realized you have to go around to get in to where the leader would talk. And I thought that was just sort of that proof of people understanding how to sort of set up a defense. You don't want to easily to get up there. You want that person to sort of be like they're speaking from the front of this monster, and that's what you have. And I think so you can assume for any kind of big speeches or something, a person standing here like I am right now, sort of talking from the belly of the beast, right? It's formidable. It's got this atmosphere to it that is so crazy. It's got a little bit of high tech with the metal of the blades of those jaws, but at the same time, that is a highly strategic place to be. If you see that rope there, you may be thinking, but couldn't somebody climb up that rope? Yes, but I'm pretty sure by that point you'd see them. That little flicker there was me jumping into the map to make sure I didn't show you guys something you shouldn't see. So these creatures are returning from the prior game. I just absolutely love that movable jelly in the back of that creature. It looks a little bit like a tick, but it's collecting sort of the energy from the different creatures, and it's got this symbolic and sort of parasite-like relationship to everybody else. And that movement that you see is just a step beyond. We also see here, once again, that this red blight, this plague, is actually sort of getting everywhere. So it's attacked and intruded on all of the tribes, no matter where the tribes are. which I think is very cool because Aloy herself has to take information to these other tribes about what she's doing and what everybody wants to do to sort of face off against this. And it's sort of cool that they're under the same. They know that this is actually spreading. So it's not, once again, a repeat of the first game. So using the focus and doing the investigations, I want to cover this real quick. I love these. And I know some people think that they're dumb, but the reason why I like these momentary bits is because it solidifies the player a tiny bit in the game world, just a little bit more than they would be traveling around, walking around. It will sometimes just move you to a particular spot, some particular thing that you may notice. It also may give you a reward. But what it does to me is it sort of lodges me in. So these creatures, I'm not really going to show you up close. They're the bristlebacks. I believe those are bristlebacks. I'm not even going to look, but I'll let you guys see those at a later time. They're ones that we've seen in the trailer, but I figure you guys will probably want to enjoy that. And we'll get to the beach and we'll probably wrap this up. The one thing that I do notice, and I would love to see maybe a slight change in the next game, is that the particular plants that are used for stealth are pretty much used everywhere, right? So you see a lot of changes in the foliage, a lot of changes in the brushes that they're using in the artistry and in the world for the big things, but they always sort of have, it's like red bush means hide inside of it. And I would like that to change, just sort of how we saw in Primal from Far Cry, where we saw them sort of change their camo depending on which of the three tribes you were facing off against. I would have liked to have seen that a little bit here. Even if you just change the color to something different, it sort of still showed the exact, let's say, exact same structure. Sorry, I had to pop in and look at the map again. Just want to verify I don't show anything. This is crazy good looking, man. This is so awesome. I just love how everything merges together. Everything looks right. Even the way the rocks look here versus the rocks in the drier area and the way everything's done. You'll see sometimes the tribesmen out here killing the creatures, killing the robots, defending them. You'll see larger battles too. Now, this is something I will not show you in this. I had a little bit in the review because I think people who seek out the review, they're okay with seeing some of that combat with the larger scale creatures. But there are battles in here where you'll come into it and you'll be like, oh my God, because it'll be like rebels, it'll be various different groups fighting, then the monsters come in and you'll just see them all join and battle up. And the Forbidden West developers have stated they wanted to make a huge change to the AI. They wanted to make the humans more intelligent. And I think they did, but they also added your light and your heavy attack, your ability to sort of add electrical damage to the enemies and then shoot it off. So it's like we added AI, and I agree with that, but in the long run, they more just change the overall feel of how everything works and makes it feel more engaging, but still, I would say that's one of the weaker points of the game. And while I walk here, we're going to get to the beach. I do want to talk about cauldrons for a second. So the cauldrons are really this game's versions of dungeons. Each cauldron does particular things, which if you haven't played the game, I'm not going to spoil it. But for the most part, you do want to go into the cauldrons and do those if you can, because they do give you abilities. We'll just say that. Now, when you look at the cauldrons and how they're set up, I talked about it at the starting of this, I believe, with the free-form sort of movement, and then you have your more structured movement in the actual cauldrons. One thing I did notice is that you sort of have to think differently when you go into the cauldron. Everything is very natural in this location and in your movement and in your travel. It's called free climbing for a reason, right? And you can sort of identify where you need to go and what you can do. However, when you're inside of a cauldron and it moves towards that more static movement, there were times where I definitely had issues where I was trying to do free movement and I ended up having a problem where, let's say, it didn't jump exactly when I was expecting because the freedom wasn't necessarily there, and it was more of that structured climbing system that we saw in the original game. And you could really consider that one of the biomes. So you have your different biomes here. You've seen one or two of them, as well as there's some more. I would say with the cauldrons, they are their own biome, and you should treat them as such. And as they have a different biome, they do have different skill requirements. Many of them don't even have enemies. Some do, but a lot of them are that jumping puzzle, right? That puzzle, the thought puzzle, moving this, moving that, adjusting things, trying to figure out exactly how you want everything to move. And so just be aware of that. Look at the moss coming off of these branches. That is just one tree. It's nuts when you look at a game like, let's say, Uncharted, and you see so much detail in an Uncharted game, but it's still quite linear, even in the larger spots, like let's say in 4, when you're driving the vehicle around, or in Lost Legacy when you're driving the Jeep around. And then you come into a game like this and you're just like, holy shit, Everything is so detailed and so stacked. Everything from the proper utilization of trees that need to get out of any area where salt water is, so they have that root system that pulls the actual body of the tree out and puts the roots as the only thing into the water and sort of elevates them, and shows also how that water gets washed out when floods may happen from the beach. It's just very cool. I decided to run away from a creature and saw one that would spoil you guys, so I moved on. But when you look at the way that they've handled the different parts and understanding the biomes, how those biomes work, I do think that the cauldrons are something that if you're a game player, you should definitely check those out, because while you're introduced to them at the starting, many of them are like sort of, here's a challenge dungeon kind of thing. That's sort of what they're set up as. Some of them are required, but some aren't, or pseudo required. And so the idea that a player may miss those because they don't necessarily like the thought process of the jumping, I get where they were going with. These are more mechanized areas. They are areas where everything is just a little bit more vertical and horizontal, perfectly spliced, versus your jungle and the way that they've built it. And in many ways, it can look antiseptic. But what I like to tell people is if you're playing this game, you should look at those places as the birthing point of these creatures. That ancient machine that just never tires, spitting out bad guy after bad guy. And so the idea of going in there, right? The idea of seeing how those bad guys are created, of seeing how the robots are created, why they're created, understanding a little bit about the past and the history, it's well worth going into, even if you're more of the fantasy fan who's playing this, because I've met a lot of people who they do skew a little bit more towards the fantasy and a little bit less towards the technology. They're okay because the bows, maybe they have their coils, but they're still bows, so they're okay with that. But I'm telling you right now, the futuristic places in this game and the amazing places that you will see, the spaces that you will go to, well worth checking out. Especially when you take into account that so many creatures return from the original game, and we have a great deal of new creatures here. And seeing that work is awesome, especially when you realize that Sony was not in love with the presentation for the original game at first. Angie Smets, one of the main creators of the game, main runners of the company themselves, talked about how when they went to show Sony, they had this idea of, hey, we're really excited about this. We're going to merge everything together that we have ready for a presentation. We're going to show Sony. Sony wasn't really responsive. Some liked it, but many of them didn't think it was going to work. And it wasn't, as you or many people have talked about or thought maybe, that it was just a female character. That was brought up a little bit, but Angie had stated that actually to almost everybody involved, that wasn't the thing. It was that they didn't really translate this idea of a person and the cycle of the gameplay, the cycle of tracking, seeing these things change from another apocalypse, tracking them, taking their parts, putting them on to defeat, and sort of move the character forward to take on more creatures with even more difficult battles. They just didn't do the greatest job showing it, or they didn't, at least to Sony. But instead of changing, they actually all went back to the offices, they discussed it, and they felt that their presentation just wasn't showing that magic. What do we need to do? They did a bunch of testing. They had people come in to sort of look and say what works, what doesn't. They adjusted some animal designs, and some of the creature designs that were in the original game plans did not make it in and are actually in this game as well. So they've actually sort of taken some of those ideas that didn't work there, and they're like, you know what, let's move them into this game and sort of let the light shine out on these guys. And the design and the understanding of what each creature does just by looking at it, or the hope, and that was their idea, was we want creatures that a person may not understand exactly every weakness they have or every strength, but we're sort of going to be able to guess what this creature is doing or what they are by sort of just looking at them. And this is one of the creatures I said I was going to show one. I believe these are the bristles. So one of the things that's so awesome about these creatures, one of the reasons why I love these guys so much, is because they just look like they're actually doing something in the game world. You can see all of that stuff coming out of them. You can see the canisters being filled up. It's just such a great idea. And when you first see it, you're like, what the hell is this? And what's great about this is, if you guys remember, at the starting of this video, I showed you the little wooden toy, and that little wooden toy is one of these creatures. It's just this cool bit of fiction that's like, it's not only outside, it's inside. It sort of inhabits these characters, the tribes, the people's dreams and nightmares and their hopes. As a child, you see that, and it's a toy, but you're sort of wondering, is it like a toy because, you know, future warriors are hoping to take this on, or is it not? I'm going to jump here to a place, show you some free jumping. So you don't have to use the focus, but I wanted to show you guys how the focus lights up areas now. And you can see that free form climbing. I'm climbing away from those enemies, so I don't show them to you. But what I liked about this, when you're doing this climbing, you're moving around, this focus does show up, but you don't really need it. You can always tell by Aloy's animations. Of course, we see this in other games. We see it in Tomb Raider, where a character will sort of lean, push, or show a sort of a weight towards another ledge, and we see that here. Also, the game isn't really 100% strict on that. You can see like this sort of get that hop climbing kind of thing where you just sort of jump, because the area isn't sort of tall enough for a person to need to grab onto something, but it's so tall that a person doesn't shuffle over it at a normal walk. And so you do have to jump Aloy. And a lot of people, I think, will think that's a little bit artificial, but to me, I actually sort of like that you can do that, and I like that bit of freedom. And as we see here, already vegetation changing as we get up towards the beach, and this will be sort of where I end it here. I'll show you some of the vistas here, show you some water, and in one small outlet, I think, and then we'll sort of end this. This is just insane looking. So I wanted to verify where we were going here, and looking at this and just seeing the spaces, the wide open places that you see in this game and how the game handles it. These kind of games make me wonder, what's the future going to be like? What is a game going to look like, or how are you going to interact with it when Red Dead 2, when Zelda, when all these games are available and you have these huge worlds? How do developers compare themselves to them? What do they do? I saw some people who, and I talked about this at the starting, people were mad about Zelda comparisons, and they're like, oh, Zelda's way better, why compare it? And I'm like, you just compared it, dude. By just saying that, you compared it. Of course they're compared. They're compared even by the developers who play the games and say, we want this element, we want that element. Those comparisons really just are that compression of speech. They give a person who knows what you're talking about in the comparison a place to begin the discussion. And if you do your discussion correctly, then a person who doesn't understand that comparison will still get it, because you will still add context to it that's useful for both groups. So that's what developers do. When developers do see a Red Dead, you can bet they're either going to want to play it, or they're going to want to see videos about it. They're going to talk about it. They're going to want to see and go, what have these guys done? The reason why we want more of that, everybody, not less. So if you see people saying we want less of those comparisons, we want less of this, you don't. You want more. And the reason why is because with those comparisons, you can hold developers, and developers can hold themselves accountable for making the quality of life changes that we want, whether that be in the HUD, which I got to tell you guys, Forbidden West HUD, it's not too good. And the inventory ain't great. It's pretty damn shoddy. And I really do wish that the Horizon Zero Dawn guys, once they had seen that first game, they saw that HUD, there were definitely complaints about the HUD. There's so many items to collect in the game. And if you do normal difficulty, you have to shoot them off. If you do easy, you can get them instantly back, or instantly from any killed creature. But still, there's so many items, right? And it's so cumbersome when you're in there. I think holding people accountable to quality of life improvements in their games is what we want. And we saw it with Red Dead as well. People were playing Red Dead and they were complaining about, Arthur's long animations or his latency response. I think latency response is far more useful as a comparison than, let's say, animations for skinning a creature, because they wanted to sort of make that feel more sim-like, where this game is certainly not that. And I think that part's fine. But those comparisons are vital. They're absolutely needed. And if you see anybody trying to control that discussion, I'm telling you right now, we got to nip that in the bud. You want those kind of things. Even if you say this other game is 10 times better, good. Because then that means that the next company that looks at it will look at that other game and say, we need to be 10 times better. And what we see with Horizon Forbidden West after Horizon Zero Dawn is that the developers themselves made challenges for themselves. They made challenges for the ecosystems. They made challenges to make sure that now you can go to the beach like this. They made even changes to the way the cloud systems work. They obviously made changes to the foliage, or at the very least improved it. And as we wrap up this last bit, I wanted to climb down here so you guys didn't see how I got here. So this is just a small spot, and I'm going to make sure that you're going to notice me sort of walk in a particular way here, because I'm not going to show you right or left, but I did want to show you some of the beach. Now, in fidelity mode, the waves are, I would say, much improved. But what we do see here is a pretty fantastic job at water physics, how it impacts things, you're actually going to see not only my character leaving, muddy footprints in the sand, but when you go into the water, you're going to see that mud spewing up from the bottom as well. You'll see animal prints. You'll also see how that water comes up right here, sort of wettens the sand and then goes down and goes away. You'll see things like the waves rolling in deeper into the inlet versus the outside. It's not a straight line, which is something that even current games still do. They won't have very detailed lines for their beaches in a lot of games. And one of the major reasons why is because it is so difficult to sort of figure out how you're going to do that kind of stuff. And in this game, you have it. You actually see places where the plant life is getting those saltwater waves rolled over them. And then the idea of how does a tree live in that? Because one of the things that you'll see somebody like myself who lived on the ocean side for 18 years of his life, I can tell you, you definitely will see, like, let's say an area where there was a big wave, that salt water will roll in, sometimes kill some trees that aren't prepared for it. And you see those kind of adjustments. But I love how this water rolls in, changes. There's also some amazing adjustments here. First, I want to say I love that the colors bleached out of all of this grass that you start to see. You start to see sort of this dead line of grass here merging into the greener grass. And that ability for it to feel organic. In a lot of places in the world, you'll see places that don't look organic. In fact, a lot of times when somebody studies a place, they'll see something that looks like a straight line. They'll be like, oh my God, there's no straight lines in nature. Actually, they are in some places, especially in some rock formations, the way rock and shale can end up separating. It can look flat. But what we see here is the dynamic and organic nature of things. So for example, this wave actually has real height. It actually pushes Aloy up and will pull her feet out from under her, so she switches to the swimming animation when it's too deep. You see these kind of adjustments. You also see, if I were to swim in here, you'll see all kinds of various fish and stuff swimming in here. But I like the beach in particular because one of the things that you're told if you live on a beach, like I said I did, one of the things you'll be told is don't stand, rock still. Don't try to fight the wave. You're going to get your ass pummeled. And that's actually what you see with Aloy. She'll dive into a wave sometimes if she's facing straight on with it. They've got a little animation. And it's not necessarily anything more than her just switching to the swim animation. That was me, by the way. But you will see that sort of adjusting. And you'll also see that sort of moment where, there we go, where the water goes out and the character looks like they stand up in 1 foot of water. And you can see that water going up and down around the character. It's just phenomenal. You see all of the different graphics changes to the way that the water reflects Aloy's body. You also see surf-looking waves at times, and I sort of wish there was some kind of dinosaur surfboard you could get, because in some areas you actually see a full curl on the wave, and I was just like, man, we need a tiny bit of maybe a shoulder pad from one of these big dinosaurs. Throw it on there, grab that, polish it up, get yourself out there. But you'll see all this different kind of stuff. There's the mud sort of coming out on my footprints. It's just really phenomenally well done. So trying not to show you guys anything, you now, of course, see saltwater fish, which are usually, not always, but usually a bit more colorful in the tropic areas, and that's what you see actually replicated here as well. It's just really an incredible job to make sure. There we go. There's a little bit of a curl. Look at that. Not too good. I mean, hey, let's be honest. Pacific Northwest, somebody probably try to surf on that. But you see all these different locations and how organic everything looks. Nothing straight. Everything looks like it's actually factually eroded. And I think that that's what we can take away from Forbidden West, is that it does an even better job where Horizon Zero Dawn offered an incredible skeleton to build that kind of thing. Horizon Zero Dawn did a great job with so much. But what happens with Forbidden West is, while the world isn't necessarily dramatically larger, they have taken it to a level that is really pristine. Graphics-wise, it runs better than most games would at this kind of graphic fidelity. The amount of variability in all of the different locations that you can go to, the flora, the fauna, added more creatures than the original even had, and some stuff that I'm not going to spoil for you. There's some pretty insane things that you can do in the game. I'll just say that. I'm going to show you this video right here. Guys, just stuck. This was my first attempt to film the first location. Within just a couple seconds, the character's just froze in place. That kind of stuff happens. The game does have its bugs. The game does have its issues. But I'm hoping when you come out of this and you understand what they've done, you understand some of the details that they've put in, also just about how they've decided to put the world together based on the multiple apocalypses and the multiple extinctions. My hope is you come out of this with a little bit better of an understanding of what they were trying to do. And we see this with Dying Light 2. I did a video on that. Red Dead 1, I did a video on that. You can see the Walking the Walk playlist. I try to do these. I want to say a big thanks to all the patrons who identified parts that they wanted me to talk about and show in this video, which does make it easier. And thanks, of course, always to GDC, who has an excellent YouTube. You can go to GDC and you can see all the discussions where a lot of this information's from when it comes to what these guys wanted to do with the original game, and some, not a bunch, about what they wanted to do with this game. We'll get those GDCs next time for Forgotten West, but just fantastic. I hope you guys love these. If you do, hey, would love for you to subscribe to the channel and check out the Patreon. Helps me do videos like this. If you dislike it, give it a thumbs down. I would hate if you had to do that, though. But anyway, peace out.